performing.
Hello, my name is Stephen Conway alongside Olivia Schneider for Sky News. We have two former congressmen in the building. Congressman, how are you?
How are you? Nice to be here, Steve.
Good. Congressman, I understand you performed at Brother Mike's yesterday?
I did, yeah. I brought my acoustic guitar and played a few songs.
How was it?
That's my real job. Ever since I've been 18 years old, I've supported myself as a guitar player and songwriter and singer. So it was fun.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I do automatically without having to think about it. Whereas various other jobs like politics take a different set of skills and, learning things that I might not have known already.
Sure.
So, but they're both important and exhilarating in their own way.
So I did a little research and already knew that about you, that you have a musical past, which I thought was interesting. It's kind of atypical for a congressman to have a musical past. So I was wondering, did you face any resistance while you were in Congress because of this unorthodox?
No, I faced some resistance in the campaign to get in Congress.
Okay.
I faced resistance in the Democratic primary from my fellow Democratic candidates who were saying, this tree-hugging guitar player can't win the general election, you should vote for him.
Republicans have said the same thing.
Unfortunately, there was a little bit of making fun of one of my album covers that my opponent called, and the general called the naked album cover, was that my band Orleans, in this one shot that turned up on an album cover in 1976, we had our shirts off and we had jeans on, but you didn't see that in the photograph, so there were implications of impropriety of some sort that were not. I mean, we were all married, we had girlfriends, and not that being straight or gay is an issue as far as I'm concerned, there's no value judgment, but my opponent was imputing something
Just
that,
trying to imply something.
yeah, is this the kind of guy you want? And my wife said, you'll probably win votes with that photo. I was 22 then.
Yeah, good abs.
Yeah.
Hold on, yeah. That's right. During your years in office, you focused a lot of your attention on the environment. What led to your passion in the environment? I know you sat on a lot of committees, the Hudson Project, cleaning up the river. What led to your passion in the environment? Did it start at a young age, or?
Well, yes, I think it did. I mean, I listened to folk music and rock and roll with lyrics that meant something to me. Those were my favorites. And I also was brought up in a family, a Catholic family that had a strong set of values, and one of those was stewardship of the earth, and lived most of my adult life near the Hudson River, which was closed to fishing because of pollution from human waste for many years. And then just after they opened up, the Clean Water Act was passed, and they put in the sewage treatment plants and cleaned it up so you could fish for food in the Hudson again. And then a year later they shut it down when they found out that GE had been dumping PCBs up in Schenectady for 30 years. And so it's still closed. It's still closed as a fishery. So things like that will kind of open your eyes. And, there were some other more personal things that happened. My neighbor crushing junk cars on his lawn on a Sunday morning, 100 junk cars, and instead of having a licensed junkyard in an industrial neighborhood. But I just gradually, events led me in that direction.
Sure. And Congressman Kuykendall, you kind of have a similar past to this. I mean, I read that you helped clean up the Santa Monica Bay.
Yeah, I was probably not identified as strong with the environmental side as John is, but the area that I was in, which I had the Santa Monica waterfront, Santa Monica Bayfront of Los Angeles was my district, everywhere from Venice on all the way down to the Palos Verdes Peninsula. And so what was interesting for me, and what I find fascinating, is the way he came from his route, talking about how the way he was raised and some of the things his family talked about, and his next door neighbor. Well, in my case, being good for the environment was also very good economic policy. Because if we let anything happen to that gorgeous beach, or if we let anything happen to the air so that we ended up sending people away, or folks walking around with gas masks on, like you see in Beijing. If we let those kind of things happen in our neighborhood, plus we were very short of water, so whether we liked it or not, we lived in a desert, we had to be very conservation conscious, and we couldn't waste it. We couldn't let it get contaminated, and if it did, we had to figure out how to clean it up because we needed it. So all of those things were very high economic impact, as well as environmental impact. So for me to be a, kind of a warrior for some of these causes, it was keeping the neighborhood, not only was it keeping it nice to live, but it was also keeping it strong economically, because the hotels stayed full, the entertainment industry was happy, the water we drank was going to be clean because we didn't have much of it and had to make sure all of it stayed clean.
Right.
So that was the difference. That was one of the differences, and there were several things that I did that specifically did that. One of them was the entrance to Marina del Rey, the largest small boat harbor in the world. 8,000 boats or something in this thing. Man-made, but it came off of a stream that came out of the central part of Los Angeles County. Well, that stream was contaminated by the industrial waste, much like the Hudson was. And the mouth of Santa Monica, of that Marina del Rey, got silted up and had to be dredged. Well, we had to not dredge it because it was contaminated waste until we could figure out a way to put the contaminated waste away. How do we safeguard the rest of the whole waterfront? Because if we go in there and start dredging up this contaminated waste from PCBs and all this other garbage, stirs it all up.
Sure.
We finally made it when the other part of my district that I represented was the Long Beach and LA Harbor. And I had a great relationship with those people because I had been in that business with them for a couple of years before. Son of a gun, they were going to do, in addition to the harbor, they were going to refill some areas, and they had a couple of spots that were going to be filled that they could effectively lock this stuff away and permanently encase it. They didn't have to worry about transporting it across the country to put it in the dump or anything. We could put it in these places. And so we did that.
Vacuumed it up.
And we actually used the contaminated waste as part of our landfill. And we didn't put it where anybody's going to be living, or we put it underneath what's going to be a paved container terminal. And I actually now, where I live, I look out at that spot where it's been covered up. And I'm going, that's just that was good economics, and it was also good environmental policy, and it was something that you could actually make sense out of. But we needed to fill. Obviously, the bigger threat though was the contamination, so we were able to pocket that away. But yeah, that's one of my areas I did, and mine was usually tied in my case to the environment, and that's where my background came from.
Well, I was going to ask, both of you have since left Congress. I guess I'll start with Congressman Hall. What did you think while you were there? What is your lasting impression?
Well, my lasting impression is that we're fortunate to have a country with a government like this, even though right now it might seem dysfunctional. There are many people, I'd say most people in the House of Representatives, the Senate too, from the ones I know, who are there for the right reasons and are trying to really do the right thing as they understand it for the constituents and for the country. There may be a few from time to time who have other motives of, self-promotion or self-benefit, or trying to help their friends, too much as opposed to helping everybody in their district. But I could count, of the ones that I know about, I would count them as a very small percentage. I think it's the ones I served with, the ones I was elected, went through orientation with, and had meetings with every week, and hung out with at night when we finished our work early enough. They're real people, and I would say at some point in everybody's life, I would encourage men and women in this country to go into public service, whether it's serving on your local school board, as Steve and I both did, or running through local town government or county, whatever level you feel you are interested in and that you can handle, because it's an eye-opener. It really is. To go from sitting on a bar stool saying, if I ran things, they'd be different than this, to actually putting your hat in the ring and having to, explain your solutions to the problems and get people to agree with you, and then have the opportunity to actually change things a little bit. It's like flexing a muscle that once you do it, it feels good, and you feel like doing it more.
Right.
And it makes democracy more participatory. We should have a citizen government as opposed to a political class and a bunch of other people who sit around complaining.
Right, yeah.
I think the first thing I realized about it, and for me it happened when I entered the state legislature in California, probably as much as the local city council that I was on. But the state government there is very similar to Congress. And for people that aren't familiar with California, the districts in the state government they're the same size as congressional seats, half a million people or more. And it's very similar kind of work. So when I entered that, I think the first thing that came up, and I noticed that I found myself kind of going, man, there's a whole lot of people who, whether they voted for me or not, have effectively given me their proxy to look out for their benefit, for their lives, in whatever I'm sitting in. And when you start thinking about it from that perspective, that you've got 600,000-700,000 people who you represent, and maybe only 100,000 of them, if you were lucky, voted for you. Depends upon the district you're in, how many voters there are. Right. And if they voted for you, then they got another 500,000 or 600,000 that didn't vote for you, actively voted against you, didn't like you. Some thought you were okay, but didn't bother to participate in the election. But after you're elected, you represent all of them, and you have to pay attention to all of their interests. You can't just pay attention to that group that voted for you. Although registered voters, I'm sure, will get more of your attention than a non-registered voter, because they are the ones who you have to campaign to every couple of years. The other thing I think I realized, I had never been in place. I had a friend of mine that I had served in the state legislature with, and he went to Congress a couple of years ahead of me. And I went to see him, I was visiting, and he said, "Hey Steve, when you get back here, you're going to be in the center of the universe." And I'm, "Well, what do you mean the center of the universe? It's the capital." He says, "No, I'm just telling you, when you get here, it's the center of the universe." And I kind of laughed him off. And it wasn't that I necessarily thought it was the center of the universe, but what I did find when I got there was I was just astounded at the number of people in places in the world, in stations in life, whether they're in the bar in Boston or they're in the Vatican in Italy, who pay attention to what we were doing every day. They were watching us on C-SPAN. They were reading about us in their local papers. They were whatever, reading about us in the local school newspaper, whatever the case was. And all of a sudden it dawned on me, I said, man, we do have a lot of impact. And you knew the United States is a big, powerful country, economically, militarily. But all of a sudden the weight of those decisions became much more clear, because you realized if I do something, I'm only going to be one vote, but I'm on the board of directors of America.
Is that a little daunting?
It can catch you that way a little bit when you start, and then and it's not that you aren't prepared to carry that load, but you don't expect it. I don't think everybody shows up there thinking, "But this," and then also you think, "Oh yeah," and you can almost kind of feel your shoulders kind of, "Oh okay, I go this load." But I think one of the things people ask me, what do you like, what did you find the most interesting about being in there? And I think it was a combination of two things, although they rubbed together. I was just astonished at the number of unbelievably interesting and important people who thought it was important to come talk to me. And I mean, I'd have the chief of naval operations show up in my office because he wanted to get a multi-year contract for F-18 fighters. And on the side, we did figure out, oh, he's a backseater in an F-14 himself. That's how he came up through the flight ranks. I've now got a daughter that flies F-14s and flew F-18, now flies F-18s. And so she's flying the planes that I helped get bought when I was in Congress with the Chief of Naval Operations. And, or somebody like, not Bernanke, but who was his predecessor? The chairman of the Fed. We would have small group meetings, and you'd have, a dozen of us, 8 or 9 of us, sit around a table in a room not much bigger than this, having cold cereal and toast. Volker. No, not Volker. The one that's got to hold for so long. But anyway, we're sitting there having breakfast with this guy, and there's nobody in the room but 7, 8, 10 members of Congress and the chairman of the Federal Reserve Bank. There's no reporters. There's no cameras. And we're asking him all kinds of questions. And you realize there's no public citizen that's going to have as good a pipeline to knowledge and information as I was going to have in that job if I wanted to use it. So those are some of the things that I noticed that were really different.
Yeah.
Now, Congressman Hall, what's next for you? I understand you have a book in the works, and
I'm working on a book, yeah. It's a sort of memoir of my transition from music to politics and back again, observations about both. Got a new song that's coming out, it'll be up on iTunes probably by Wednesday of next week.
Taylor Swift is out today. You better
I don't know.
1989.
I don't know how much of her audience and mine overlap.
Well, there's some, I'm sure.
Well, this song is a duet with Dar Williams, and I think it's a totally, from an objective standpoint, I think it's a really good song. And I hope it gets a good reception. I'm performing with my band New Orleans. The last few weeks we've been playing from Napa, California to Oakland, Maine, and Chautauqua, New York, near Lake Erie, and Sabre, Connecticut. And you know, we do the dartboard tour. I think sometimes our booking agent just throws darts at the map instead of being sequentially rooted. It sometimes seems that we're flying an awful long way from one show to another. But it's still it's good to know that records that I made in my 20s and 30s, people will still come, you know, to hear us sing the same songs. So and we're writing new songs, and I'm recording, arranging them, and so on. So that work goes on. I mean, that's something I do without thinking about it. Inspiration will come to me, and I'll have to sort of follow the muse and get it down on. Now it's not tape, it's digital recording, but you know, have it preserved somehow.
right. And I understand did you work at Broadway, any chance?
I wrote and directed the music for a Broadway show in
Okay.
1969.
Wow.
And 2 off-Broadway shows, one of which won the Obie, which is the Village Voice's best off-Broadway of the year. And I played on stage in the house band, and that was when I first made money through the Musicians Union. It was I went from sleeping on rooftops and sleeping on people's couches to being able to afford an apartment on the Lower East Side. I mean, it was the difference between a $6 a night and all the potato chips you could eat gig at the Cafe Wa in the Greenwich Village to playing on Broadway and making, I forget, it was $1,500 a week or something like that, which those days was some real money. You know? And so I thought I'd hit the big time, and I guess I had in a way, but that was only the beginning for me. I learned to write on demand. I was given a task. You have 22 songs to write in 2 weeks, and then you got to teach the actors how to sing the songs. You got to teach the band how to play the songs, and I met those deadlines. And so that was one of the ways I knew that I could do the same thing for a rock and roll band. You know, if we needed to make a record by such and such a time, be on tour and be rehearsed, I knew that I could pull it together.
That's great.
And Congressman Kuykendall, you served 2 tours in Vietnam.
Yeah.
And both of you have had experience working with veterans or to improve their lifestyles. To close, can you each touch upon that?
That was for me instrumental a period of my life. I mean, I thought I was going to make a career in the Marine Corps, and so I actually got out of college a year early, graduated early, so that I could not miss the war. I mean, if you're going to be a career military officer, you don't want to miss the war. That's the only war you got going on. I may not ever have another chance. Silly me. I mean, I had plenty of chances, as it turned out. But I didn't get to keep the career. I was hurt. I didn't get wounded, but I was hurt, and I went out on a disability retirement. So I'm a disabled Vietnam veteran, and I get a little lunch money check from the VA every month now. And I'm just tickled pink that we have guys like John Hall, who chaired that committee, who keeps an eye on making sure that veterans get taken care of. The generation of veterans that I fall in has probably got a unique spot in American history, in that we were a generation of veterans who were terribly abused by the American public. They took out on the veteran what they should have been taking out on the